So, with the housekeeping done and under control, we're on to the real stuff. And that means I can introduce your first speaker for this evening. So, please welcome, hi Jen, this is Jen Weber. So, Jen is here tonight to talk about Alex. She is a web developer, a writer, a speaker, and an Ember.js core team member. That's very cool. She tries to make tech a more welcoming place, which is nice because I think you're in the right place for that, Jen. Jen's going to give us an introduction to Alex. Whether it's your own writing or someone else's writing, Alex helps you find gender-favoring, polarizing, race-related, religion-inconsiderate, or other unequal phrasing in text and help you fix it. Jen, the internet needs more of this, and I'm so pleased that you're here.
Thanks so much, Lorna. I'm happy to tell everyone a little bit about Alex, which is this open source library that I've been using for maybe 4 years or so. A friend of mine introduced me to it. They had heard about this project through the grapevine, and they thought maybe this was something that we could use in documentation, blog posts, things like that for some of the resources that we were helping to manage. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my own experience using it and some of the possibilities and pitfalls that come with checking for inclusive or uninclusive language in the things that you're writing. My name is Jen. You can find me at JWWW Weber on Twitter and Jen Weber on GitHub. I'm a volunteer writer for Ember.js. I maintain some of the documentation there. It's a front-end framework that helps people build JavaScript applications primarily for the web. So what is Alex? Alex is an open source tool that helps you screen your Markdown files and your HTML files and your text files to find insensitive language and help you to make a change. It suggests fixes in many cases. This library was created by an prolific open source author named Titus. Their username is Worm, WOOORM, around 2015. And these tools are part of a much larger ecosystem that helps you do things like turn Markdown into HTML, to turn HTML into Markdown, all of those types of things. It's like a giant suite of language tools. And Alex is one little tiny slice of the things that are available, but you can use it standalone, even if you're not using the rest of those ecosystem tools. I found it to be a really valuable testing tool for blogs, documentation, like pretty much anything, readmes for your apps, all of those things. So before we get into what Alex actually does, it's important to consider why it exists. The most important thing is to remember that words matter. And choosing the right word is like sort of, the right words to use is an ongoing learning journey. It's something that we should invest in. The next piece is that we are writing for global audiences when we're working in open source land. So I can't expect that somebody who lives across the ocean from me knows all the ins and outs of different like localized insults that could, they could use that in their writing and not even know that it's offensive or frustrating or hurtful to somebody else. And so tools like this are kind of like a safety net for catching those types of issues. The next thing is that language is complicated. It's huge. There's so much to know. And so whenever we can, it's great to use tools that help us get better and better over time and continue our learning. So what does it actually do? Let's say we give Alex this string here. Learning JavaScript is so simple. Alex is going to output a warning that says simple may be insensitive, try not to use it. The reason here is that what's simple to me as a developer who's been working on a particular tool for a while it might not be simple to somebody who's using it for the first time. It might not be simple to somebody who thought they knew what they were doing and ran into problems and they're so frustrated. I'm going to add to that frustration that my usage of that word can be hurtful. It can push other people away. You know, the worst case scenario is that they might say like, oh, it's so simple for everybody else. Maybe I'm not good enough to be a developer. That's like a really sad thing, but it happens. So Alex is going to help us catch things like this. Other things it can use is help us catch outdated and hurtful language. So the norm in a lot of projects on the web still is to call your main branch of your project master. There are better words that we can use. And if you are working on a README or something, you know, you can, even if that's the branch name that's currently in use, this is going to help you see like, oh, maybe there's something else I can say here that will be more generic than naming the specific branch. And then I have set myself up for success when that project switches their main branch on GitHub to be main instead. So it helps me also have to do less work in the future to adapt. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to show you a few different examples of what it actually looks like when you put Alex into your testing, your test suite. So here's an example. We've passed it. It's not really important to read all of the text on this page here. The things that I want to bring your attention to are that we are calling the function Alex with our string that we want to check. And that string says, learning JavaScript is so simple. Just install this and you'll be on your way. It gives us an error in our test suite. The test fails, and it tells us that maybe there are these two words that need to be replaced with something better. Another option is that you can run Alex as part of your linting for your project. So I work in a lot of projects that have tons of markdown files, and I can just do, you know, npm run lint or yarn lint, have that run a command that looks for all of the markdown files in my project, and then outputs a great big list of the things that it finds, or ideally, it says that it found nothing. So these are just two different ways you can use Alex in your test suites. You can also use it on demand. You know, if you've written a new blog article and you just want to check it once and you're not sure like about this whole business of incorporating it into your test suite, like that's fine too. That's totally another valid way to use this tool. All right, so like all software, there's some tips and tricks on how to succeed when you're using Alex. We're also going to talk a little bit about the things that Alex cannot do for you, what its limitations are, what its pitfalls are, and like overall how to provide a good experience for yourself and for the other developers who work in the same code bases as you. So the most important thing is to start by having a conversation if you're going to try and incorporate this into your tools. It is like very bewildering if one day all of your tests start to fail. If a regular contributor to your documentation all of a sudden sees all these warnings about the thing that they just wrote, like that's kind of an isolating or confusing experience. And so it's much as possible, it's a good idea to give people that you are giving them a heads up. You want to let them know what this tool is doing, why it's being added, and more importantly, how to deal with the errors that it throws. We'll get a little bit more on how to deal with the errors in a bit. Another important thing is to create a configuration file. So, for example, I do a lot of blog post writing, and it's very common that we use people's pronouns when we're writing about the work that they have done. And so we don't want Alex to warn us that we're not using gender neutral language because we like want to say like, you know, so and so did this work. So in our case, we've allowed pronouns of all different kinds, and then we just kind of manually check to make sure that something hasn't creeped in that isn't gender inclusive. Another thing is you can increase the profanity sureness. There's a score by which it has to pass before it throws an error, and that's something that can be configured project by project. There's also an opportunity to ignore certain files. So let's say you want to just start using Alex only on new content as your first baby step into incorporating this into your tools. You can do that. It doesn't have to check all the things. The next thing is to make exceptions when you need them, teach other people how to do this. A lot of our language in tech is like different usages of gendered words, or like maybe, you know, we just don't have good replacement terms popularized yet. It's helpful to make sure that you can make an exception when it's needed. And Alex is not correct all the time. It takes its best guess. It's really just kind of, it's not looking at the context of a sentence to see how something is used. That's up to us, the humans. And so being able to ignore things is like a really important part of the experience to make sure people know how to do it. So some limitations. This is the most important one, which is that no automated tool can replace studying, inclusive communication, and listening to the lived experience of others. Alex can only give you hints about what might be a problem, about what might be a good replacement. At the end of the day, we still have to use our best judgment and continue to learn. It's not going to catch everything. It can't, because, you know, it's made by people. People can't catch everything. Again, it can't choose the best wording for you. Sometimes it would suggest wording maybe that just really does not make sense for how you are using that word, and like, that's fine. Add an ignore to it in your configuration, ignore that one's use of it, and like move on. Another limitation is that it's important to not get into a false sense of security here. If all of your tests pass, if Alex gives you the green light at the end of this, that doesn't mean that your writing is inclusive and considerate. It's just one piece of your evaluation of those things. And as I mentioned before, it can't interpret much about language context. This isn't, you know, some people may have used AI and machine learning based tools that have like this really incredible, powerful grasp of language, and it can parse sentences and change grammar and things like that. Alex is a much simpler tool. It has more in common with like a spell checker. And so, again, it's up to you to determine language context and adapt it to fit your own needs. So we'll talk just for a moment about contributing to Alex. One word of warning here is that these are tools that are meant to catch things that are offensive and hurtful. And so if you open up these code bases, you will find things that are offensive and hurtful. So, you know, make your own choices about which parts of the code base you would contribute to. There's lots of different ways that you can help create more inclusive writing on the web. And so, you know, if this isn't for you, then that's fine. So I'm going to show you some like very simple examples here that do not use any like profanities or anything. So there's two libraries that are behind Alex. There's retext equality and retext profanities. These are two categories of things that it is checking for. And in order to add a new rule to something, you would write it as YAML. So YAML is just like some fancy formatted text, basically. You don't have to know any programming languages in order to make an addition and add a rule such as this. So you say like, what are the words you're trying to check for? The notes help educate other people as to why this rule is included in the library. And then source gives people an opportunity to learn more. That's one of the cool things about this library, I think, is that it's like pushes you in the right direction of learning more about the world around you, about language, about how people understand it. So thanks to everybody who's helped to make these tools possible. There's the open source creators and contributors of Alex. There's my friend Siva, who introduced me to this library and suggested that it might be something to look into. And then this presentation template comes from Slides Carnival. Some resources that can help you out in your own learning journey. You can visit alexjs.com in order to learn more about this library, see how it's used. Got a link to the GitHub, that's getalex/Alex. Once you're on that page, there's a whole bunch of information in the README, particularly the further reading section that will link you to more resources that help you to level up your inclusive writing beyond even what Alex can do for you. I also have a small demo of Alex in action. Those are the screenshots that I showed earlier with the code samples. You can find that on GitHub as well at jenweber/alex-demo. And then lastly, I wanted to mention a project called the Self-Defined app. This has been ongoing for the past couple of years. It's an open source glossary of the different terms that people use to define themselves or other people have used to define them. And it's a great way to continue learning about different vocabulary, as well as, we talked a little bit earlier about how the most important thing is to listen to people's lived experiences. This is a great place to go and see how people define themselves. Because one thing, a word that may have been offensive in the past, maybe it's something that a group of people is like now owning and claiming, or maybe an individual has chosen to use that word for themselves. This is a great place to go and learn more about those experiences. Thank you so much.
You have to imagine like a whole audience of clapping. You just can't see them.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I can see you.
Okay, well, I'm trying to make up for all of us. Thank you so much, Jen. That was really interesting. I had vaguely heard of Alex, but I hadn't actually used it. And now I feel like there are no excuses. I definitely should. Do have some questions for you.
Sure.
So let's start with, are there any plans to make Alex context sensitive?
So I'm not too sure. I can't really speak to the plans for the library moving forward. What I do know is that since I have used Alex, there have been features added that provide more advanced searching. So for example, I had a rule I wanted to add that would have required writing regex, that's regular expressions. It's like a flexible way of searching through text. And that was added, that capability was added to the library. So it's not quite context aware, but it is a little bit more precise and targeted than just like searching for a specific keyword.
So with that, could I then, if we have an expression that is simple template or something, can I let it pass the simple at that time and still catch when I'm being patronizing in another context?
If you modified it to work that way, I suppose you'd probably have to fork it and start making your own changes to the rule set. Since this is open source, that's something that could be done. I think it would be incredible, like if a company chose to adopt this internally for the things that they're working on and needed to make lots of customization. That's like, cool, that's things we can do because it is open source.
Yeah, we're all here to scratch our own itch. And I think that's an important part of the open source. Okay, so with Alex, is it purely something that you would use by itself, or like you use it? I saw it in your npm script, so people typically would have this in their build steps. Is that the best way to use it?
It really depends on the project. And for the projects I work on, we use it as a linting step. So similar to how someone might run ESLint to check their the JavaScripts that they've written for mistakes, then it also runs this linting tool, and it like fails that step. So we run it as part of our continuous integration testing. So in order for a pull request to get merged, these things have to pass. I think that's a really nice approach if your files are already represented as HTML or Markdown, in which case that works. If they're not, then, or if the files you're working with are created by JavaScript code, there's no like HTML, there's no big chunk of HTML files to look at, then you need to incorporate it into your test suite, which takes a little more effort, but not too much. In the example of like a Jest test suite, for example, it's a very popular library in JavaScript world. You could add a little bit of code that makes sure that this check runs at the end of every test, for example.
I love that. I think I have been in this industry long enough to remember when we could forget to run the tests. And the fact that this is here and we never need to think about it or argue about it, it's configured, and it's going to keep us to our promises, I think is really cool. Awesome. Okay, and I want to take maybe just one more question for you, and that is, does the Alex project have a way to accept donations? Do you have GitHub sponsors, or is contributing the best way to support the project?
That's a good question. I am not sure, but I can look that up and post it in Discord. I know the larger ecosystem project is called Unified, and I believe there's fundraising set up for that. But for specifically for Alex, I think I'll post a link if I find something.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I can't see any typing notifications. I think I've run out of questions, but you definitely made my to-do list longer in the best possible way. So thank you so much for bringing this to us tonight.